Welcome to Gabriels Gospel Grace, where you will receive wisdom and the Word of God.
So there's that. But of course, when someone becomes a proper believing Christian and starts to look at their life through the lens of the Bible and moving in a Christian way, they start to transform who they are, and that can have an impact. But what about yourselves? I mean, I know you obviously you shared your story before, but when you became, fully fledged, standing on the word Christian, did you find you had to kind of share that with people, or is it just kind of accepted in the States?
So it's interesting you give your background of how you got there. How did your family relate to that?
Well, I was, what actually happened is I had moved away. I went to Australia for a year and kind of I was living in sin in a lot of ways, and we don't need to go into that, but I came home and I really had this deep conviction. Somebody at my new workplace, when I came back to the States, started sharing Jesus with me and asked me if I was born again. And I was like mad. I was like, what do you mean? Get out of my face. I got my own belief, talk to my hand. And so then this person was just so kind and so patient. And so I watched that person at work. And then it was like the Holy Spirit was starting. I was sensing something was shifting. I didn't know it was the Holy Spirit then, and this is how it would be. And you start realizing, I really don't know God. I thought I did, then I actually pulled out a Bible I was given years ago by one of the older veterinarians I used to work with. He was what they call a Gideon, who are famous in the world for giving out Bibles. I said, I didn't have a Bible. He showed up about a half an hour later with a Bible, a proper size one. And he said, well, here, you can have, now you've got a Bible. And it sat on the shelf for a long time until all of a sudden I started realizing, you know what, I don't know what it says in there. And so then I started reading, and then I got really felt great conviction that I needed Jesus, because there was nothing I could do, no good works, no amount of good works that would ever make me, pass the litmus test for God. And then I became born again. So he took it all so that we can have it all, which is so amazing. And then I was like that crazy family member who got religious. So there you go. And I was born again in a Southern Baptist church in the South. Chris and I both have a similar, we moved away from our families, and it's almost like the Apostle Paul. And if you don't know what happened with him, God moved him way out for like years, separated him after he came to know Jesus, and had to help him renew his mind and help him learn who he was in Jesus, away from a lot of the effects of maybe pressure of family or pressure of the people who used to know him for who he was. He was a Pharisee. He was a completely different person. So we were both, we moved away from our families, multiple states away. It'd be like
over 1,000 miles.
Over 1,000 miles. Wow. So we didn't have, we could kind of individuate and move into different way of living. And God had opportunity to renew our mind and teach us without too much family pressure. But we still had to face our families. We weren't married then. We didn't even know each other when we were born again. We each have individual testimonies. But yeah, I got religious on my parents too. All of a sudden, I almost tipped over into this different place where I didn't really consult the Holy Spirit on how to talk about that with my parents. Or, you thought you're doing the right thing, and you do stupid things like give your mom and dad a Bible for Christmas with their names on it, which was a complete insult to my dad. I mean, I had to really ask the Lord to help me smooth that over. So that's kind of how it happened but my family still talks to me, so.
Yeah. When my background's a little different, but there are some parallels with Lisa's story. I was older as well. I was a military officer, was really successful except for one thing. I was a drunk. That didn't go over well at the time. And long story, how God drew me to him, but it was through my inability to overcome alcohol. And when I finally got to the end of myself, there was another officer in the squadron that I've been watching for a couple of years, because, up to that point in my life, most of the people who I had seen who made it obvious that they were Christians, they were very outspoken about it, were also very hypocritical. They had a tendency, one of the two most impactful in my life at that point, one was Catholic, one was Protestant. So it crossed religious lines in that regard, but they were very much, telling everybody else what they had to do while their own lives were a mess anyway. And that offended me. I was like, if that's what I have to be one of God's people, I'm not interested. Well, this guy in the squadron I was in, this other naval officer, he was a Christian, but he was different. He was genuine and humble, but yet, if you challenged him on his beliefs, he knew what he believed and he was willing to stand his ground, but he wasn't belligerent about it. And he didn't push it on anybody else. And I watched him for 2 years looking for that hypocrisy, and it wasn't there. So because he was the real deal, when I got to the end of myself, he was able to introduce me to Jesus. And that changed everything in my life. The alcohol went away almost immediately. Just different. I had different desires, and it wasn't a struggle or a challenge. But I was born again in a denominational church, a Protestant church that, they really pushed evangelism and getting people saved. And so I went back to my parents' house and I was going to save my dad. Mm-hmm. And so I went and I, and keep in mind, my dad and I, there was a lot of conflict there my entire formative years. We butted heads a lot. And I think it's probably because we were so much alike, but a generation apart. So I'm not blaming him for that. I had a lot of responsibility in that whole thing. But when I became a believer, when I accepted Jesus, I was like, okay, now I'm going to go save my dad. And that right there points to the problem. I was all about me and what I was going to do. I was going to save that's not how it works. Jesus is the one who saves us, not Chris. So I had it wrong from the get-go and jumbled, but I was inexperienced. I was, young in the Lord. I just didn't know. And I was full of zeal without knowledge, I think is the way the Bible would say it. And anyway, it was as much of a disaster as you can imagine. And fortunately, it didn't destroy the relationship, but God showed me the errors of my ways and why what I was doing was wrong, because I was making it all about me instead of about him. And what I ended up doing instead was trying to be a friend to my dad, which was a challenge, and I didn't do it very well. But I realized he needed friends. He didn't need somebody to tell him how messed up he was. Mm-hmm. And so that was a process of years working it through.
And we found our families have not, we both have relationship with our family. My parents are passed down, but my brother, he and his family, we have relationship with them, and Chris has relationship with his family as well. And what we've learned over the years is just, you got to listen to the Holy Spirit, because meeting people where they're at. I remember when I first got born again and I would go home to visit my folks, and my dad, he could cuss up a storm and, say, he talked about Jesus a lot and God, but not exactly like we would, not necessarily scripturally, but it offended me. And one day the Lord said, I was saying, Lord, and he said, wait a minute, I'm not offended that your dad talks that way. Why are you offended? And I was like, oh, what do you mean? He said, it's for him. It's like he's saying, it's just part of his language. I'm not offended. What? You need to not be offended. I was like, okay, I guess I got to get my little, all of a sudden you become born again, and then you can really fall into, ways of self-righteousness again. And so we just had to learn how to love our families, and we did it imperfectly. Thank God for God. He gives you grace for your past mistakes, and he can smooth things over way better than we can screw things up sometimes. But one thing we just always determined in our hearts that we would not we would always stay, as far as our heart would stay connected. If they rejected us and chose not to be with us at certain times, or if they wanted to not be with us forever, that was going to always be a choice of theirs, not ours, because we were going to do everything we could to at least keep the connection together. Yeah, and we learned that love them for who they are, right? And that's what God is. just treat them like people and love them. And I haven't done that all that well, because that's just not, I don't know, I won't make excuses. I have a lot of room to grow in that area where my family is concerned, but at the same time, they know where we stand, and we've had some conversations, but we let them initiate those conversations, and if they're not interested, we're not going to push, because we honor them. We don't have to agree with them to honor the person that God made them to be. They have freedom of choice, and a lot of these is their decisions. We've made it clear where we stand. They're welcome to come to us, but we're not going to push it on them. And I think that has really made it easier for us to enjoy their company, even when we don't agree. And there have been times of exploration. I know Chris's brother came and visited once before he was married, and he had lots of questions for us. He was just very curious about Christians and Christianity. So we had a great time just talking about things. And again, honestly, our family's like, I think his mom has been super awesome, and she supported us going to Scotland. She's just been very supportive. And I think when you consult the Lord, like, how can I speak love to this person in a way that they feel loved and they don't feel judged by me, because I don't want to judge them. I know, that's not my place. Then you can hear from the Lord, and he can give you good wisdom on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to hear. I mean, you probably haven't caught last week's episode, but it sounds like when people have this eureka moment, I've been saved, I'm now in relationship. Leslie referred to it as a Gatling gun. Of you meet people and and she said John in particular, once he converted, he was a Gatling gun everywhere they went. And that's something, again, like you said, you had to kind of learn to curb it. You realize you're not helping people by spouting this stuff. And I think that obviously is a deterrent for some people, is they see a transformation. Now, for the pair of you, though, it sounds like your transformation was for the better. So for a lot of people, they'd probably see it as, well, it might be a phase they're going through, but it's working for them. So I think in that respect, sometimes families are quite good at allowing for it, but you must know families that would probably, or you might have had students where it's the opposite. So if I give you a scenario of, perhaps someone's even changing religion, that they've decided to become a Christian, and to break it to the family is obviously big news. Have you had any experience of that, and what kind of advice would you give on that topic?